Arshay and I are a little bit competitive because of our backgrounds, but I win because I'm stuck at the JW Marriott Camelback and he's stuck in Oklahoma City. So I win from the get-go. So, hey, everybody, if you've got any questions as we go through, I think Susan has enabled the chat or the Q&A, and you can send those in, and I'll try to ask those questions as we go through. So I want to kind of briefly tell you guys how we got here. So before the pandemic, my daughter Ava started going to Townview SEM. She comes home one day and she says, this guy came by our school and told us about a sport we've never heard about, and we should go to White Rock Lake. And I'm like, what the hell? What? Like some guys just showing up at your school and saying, meet me at the lake. And so we go to the lake, and it's all about rowing. And I played college basketball. My husband played college football. We know nothing about rowing. So we stood to the side and just watched. And then a few months later, we were asked to go see a documentary, A Most Beautiful Thing, about the first all-Black rowing team that came out of the west side of Chicago. My husband's from the south side of Chicago, so he was all in on that. We go and we see this group of Black guys to the side. We kind of looked, gave a head nod, and kept moving. So then pandemic happened. Afterwards, we are meeting Arshay at a Dallas United event. And we learned 2.5 years later that man that came to Ava's school was Arshay Cooper. And that is like what his passion is to talk about rowing because it changed his life, and to diversify the sport, not to exclude anyone, but it's all about inclusion. And he has now been able to speak to several different business groups and sports groups and kids all about his book. And hopefully you guys have gotten the book. The documentary is great, but the book and reading his words is just really impactful. So now, all right, Arshay, let's get going. So let's just talk, how are you doing from the pandemic? Tell us where you're living. Tell us all about Arshay real quick.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Amy, for having me. I'm super excited. Thank you, Susan. I am in Oklahoma right now, but I'm from Chicago. I live in Brooklyn now. I have a toddler. She keeps us alive during the pandemic, right? Sometimes our teenagers are talking about the things that affect them about the pandemic, but the toddler doesn't exist. So whatever she want to go outside, we go outside, and so she keeps us alive through this pandemic. But life is well, and I am so happy that I'm able to just give myself away to offer this opportunity that changed so many young people's lives.
Well, you're not just changing young people's lives. You've been talking to executives across the country and changing the way that they see leadership. So, I mean, when I read your book, it talks about being stronger, faster, and more focused, which is really what I needed and what a lot of people need coming out of the pandemic. So there's one thing about living an amazing experience. There's a second thing about writing about it. So tell us about why you decided to put pen to paper and write the book, A Most Beautiful Thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a few things. One is to show that talent is everywhere, but access and opportunity is not. I wanted to give people who go to the news or the newspaper and read about young Black men in Chicago not really understanding. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to kind of unlearn. And so, for example, if you watch the film, one of the things that Pooh said, he's one of our teammates, he said, when they tore down the YMCA, I ran to the streets. And I remember that YMCA. It had 150 kids there. That's where the coaches were, the counselors were, the mentors. And those sorts of things were happening all the time where these programs were losing funding. And now you have 150 kids hanging out in the street. So I don't care if you're Black, white, Asian, if you have 150 kids out with nothing to do, things happen. Bad stuff, And so I wanted to do that, and also wanted to inspire young people and let them know that the combination of sports, academic support, and youth entrepreneurship yields a powerful return. And the last thing is to show all of us on the screen in the country what happens when we all get together to give our time, talent, and treasure, the impact that it makes on young kids, not only at that time, but 20 years later.
Okay, so let's take a step back because there may be a few folks that haven't gotten the book yet or haven't looked at the documentary. Can you explain to us how being introduced to the sport of rowing changed your life?
Yeah, in two ways. I grew up on the West Side. Folks know that, and experienced a lot of hardship. Literally slept, hearing gunshots all night, and lost friends, ran for my life, and skipped over pools of blood, and had a lot of trauma. And walking into the lunchroom one day in my public school, I saw a boat in the lunchroom, and behind that boat was the TV monitor, and they were showing the Olympic Games. And it looked like an opportunity, Amy. I was like, oh my God, this looks amazing. But no one on the screen looked like me or the world I was used to. So I said no to the opportunity and walked away. And then the next day they had pizza, and I was like, okay, like I do anything to eat, food that's not from the lunchroom. And so I went up to the info session, and first I seen this woman, and she was just so welcoming. And I was raised by women, and most of my teachers were women. I felt comfortable with women. I was a sensitive kid, and I felt like the details that women had, and they got me in a way that most men didn't. So I was like, wow, like to be coached by a woman is awesome. And then number two, in this sport where no one looks like us, there was a Black coach, and I think that showed the parents that our kids will be protected in this space where no one looks like them. So the fact that the leadership looked like the whole city really helped me to decide to take on the opportunity, and they became my family. And that completely changed my life. And the second thing is that the sport represented wellness. Sometimes we introduce the sports, but not wellness. And when you're out there in that water, you're downloading that serenity that comes with it. There's no crowds, right? When you're out there practicing every day, the sport is non-combative, it's non-conflict, and you learn how to swim. The sound of the blade hitting the water was amazing. So it became a sport of meditation before a sport of competitiveness, and it reduced the trauma while other sports kind of triggered the trauma for me.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I played different sports, and I wanted to fight because I've been chased and people were always at me. And so it actually reduced the trauma, and it calms those storms that you go through every day. And then when you pull in together for an hour, just hearing you begin to develop a magical rhythm that changes things for you inside. And so those are the two things that really changed my life with the sport.
So real quick, talking about that aspect, but before you get to you've got to get through the conditioning.
Yeah.
And that part of the book was absolutely hilarious to me. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we wasn't ready for it, right? Our bodies wasn't ready for it. But yeah, it's like, again, I talked about the rowing being the water being the ritual part, but like we needed our body to change. Sometimes we don't do well, maybe at work or in life, because we don't feel well. And I think the training piece, right? Being able to work every day and work hard, and what sports puts your body through, I think you begin to realize that anything after this becomes a lot more easy, right? If I can get through D1 sports, if I can get through 6 years of intense workouts, I can do anything in the work field, right? And so I think that it was a shock to our bodies, but it was the best thing to get us ready for not just sports, but for life.
Okay, so you write a book, check, and then there's a documentary. So run us through how that happened.
Yeah, so first, Amy, like I self-published my book because I met with so many agents and editors, and they were like, "Did you win gold medals?" And I was like, "No," and it was like, "Nah, they had no interest writing a book." So I was like, you know what, it's so much more than sports, and so self-published, and I hustled. I was on the subway, New York subway. I was mailing free books to schools, and I was just getting a book out there. I was hustling. And then one lady who's a film director named Mary Mazio, an Olympic rower, read the book, and she reached out and said, "Hey, I love this story. I want to put it on the big screen." And I was like, "Yeah, the first thing you have to do is come to Chicago and kind of learn how we live and who we are." And so she came to Chicago and spent time with us. And she was like, I have an old friend named Grant Hill who played for Duke. I was like, what? And she said, I told him the story and he wants to be a producer. And then he had no idea that this story existed. And
nobody did.
Yes. And so he reached out to one of the hometown heroes, Dwayne Wade. And then
some guy, some other slacker.
And then Common, and it was
never heard of him.
He was like, we know that school. That school was one of the most violent high schools in Chicago, and it was all about it. And then, we put the book out there, the film out there to the world.
That is crazy. Yeah, because Common and Dwayne Wade would know because they're from Chicago. So that makes the Grant Hill thing didn't make sense, but now that makes sense. Okay. Okay. I brought it all around for me. Okay. So you started talking about how the book impacts kids, but we're now sitting here and you're talking to over 100 in-house counsel at different companies that are based in Dallas. So why do you think your book and your story has resonated for business leaders?
I think because the book really dive deep into the lack of access, diversity, inclusion, equity, the power of opportunity, but also it teaches, it talks about a Black man who navigated through his space his whole life and now walked into unfamiliar space, unfamiliar territory where no one looked like him, and how he navigated through that. And it also showed people who didn't look like me in Rowan, how do we create a space that is welcoming, that is competitive, that is joyous and inclusive for everyone. And the story really talks about how we came together and healed and worked through all those things. And I think that is something that companies are now trying to solve today.
Okay. And so what are some of those lessons just in general? Because we want them to buy the book, but so we don't want to read the book to them, but what are some of those lessons that they can take from the book?
Yeah. One of the lessons, like when you're in a boat, there's 8 of you. And I think that the first lesson is that I learned that I can't do the work of 8. 8 must do the work of 1, and we'll get there much faster and more effectively. Right. That was like one of the biggest lessons. Also, in rowing, is the water is choppy, and so I think it taught us how to perform in stressful conditions when we can't control it, right? And how the power of team and learning from each other and working together, and at the same time learning how to balance our lives and balance each other in the way we work, and was a great lesson. I say the last thing. So many lessons, I would say, is that rowing taught us to not let the small distractions destroy our journey, because there's a lot of small distractions in the race, and we realized that the problems we create can become our reality, right? And if we find ourselves thinking what can always go wrong, we end up there, and that's exactly how we hit the brick wall, and we didn't win a race. But it's just like my uncle, he taught me how to ride a bike, and he was like, just stay focused on what lies ahead. And every time I looked at the bushes, I ended up in the bushes, right? And so the sport teaches you how to trust the leadership, the coxswain, the person who's driving this boat, and really stay focused on the mission and how to live within the mission. And so I think those are a few of the lessons that you can learn from the book that you can use every day in the workplace. So
there's some people on here that may not know what rowing is. So can you just describe the boat and where the coxswain sits and what everyone's doing in the boat?
Yeah, so it's a long boat, right? And everyone is rowing backwards.
Yeah.
Right? You're moving forward. You're moving forward, right? But you're looking in the opposite direction, and you're rowing backwards, but you're really pushing forward. And the coxswain is in front of you or behind you, depending on what kind of boat it is. And they're really steering the boat so you don't run into another boat or run into the wall. And they call it in the commands. When you're getting tired, it's like power 10 and 2. Let's give it all you got, And so that's kind of the way the boat is. And that's why my quote, one of the quotes in my book is that in rowing, we move forward by looking in the opposite direction. I learned it's okay to look back as long as you keep pushing forward.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Okay. So obviously leadership is a big deal that you talk about in your book. And one point you share, quote, "I've learned that leadership is not the position, but the effort you put in." Elaborate on that for me.
Yeah, I think that, on every team, if it's at work or if it's in sports, we all kind of know who's that person who wants it a little bit more than everyone else. Like that person shows up early, who's like totally crazy, who worked themselves sick, right? Like we all know who that person is. And I think that we can't be content with that. For me, I was that person, but it only made me good at sports, and there's a lot of professional athletes in basketball who's that person, everyone knows who that person is. But what makes you a great leader, what makes you great, what makes you that Kobe and MJ is when that person says, okay, how can I get everyone else to want it just as much as I do? And when you can do that, that's when you win, right? And for me, as you saw in the doc, I had to show up at everyone's house in the morning before school, right? And I asked them questions like, what keeps you up at night? What keeps you going, right? If I have $5, I'm not buying myself 2 slices of pizza, even though I wanted it. You're getting half. I learned to invest in them and build their trust. And that's what a leader does, and help bring that greatness out of them. And I say the second part of that leadership was, I was speaking in Harlem, and there was this kid that was there at the school. And I asked all these kids, I said, what's your dream? And one kid said to eat at Chipotle. And everyone started laughing. And he was just looking at me while everyone was laughing, shaking his head. And I thought back when I was younger, I was like, if Chipotle wasn't around, there was no way I would have been able to afford Chipotle. It was hard to eat food some days. And after the class, I told the school counselor, I said, here's $20. We have to make sure he eats at Chipotle. Because if we can eliminate the small dreams, there's room for bigger dreams. There's room for more dreams. And my only dream was to go downtown Chicago. I live 5 miles away and never been downtown.
That is so crazy. Yeah, there's so many people. Same thing in Dallas. Southside Dallas kids can see the skyline, never go downtown.
And it's amazing what happens when you go from seeing dirt and concrete all your life to watering grass, right? It changes everything. And when I went downtown because of Rowan, I was like, I want to go out of town. I never even think about going out of town. But the coach and our leadership was eliminating the small dreams, says there's room for more dreams. And for me as a leader, I always I'll kind of put it in this Sweet 16 bracket, but I want my team to always live in that championship round, to always live in the mission. But before that, we have these goals, and we're eliminating goals every week. So we can get to the big goals, so we can live in the mission. So as a leader, I always look at number one, investing, spending time, building relationships. Like I said, showing up and figuring out ways to get them to want it just as much as I do. But at the same time, I want to know what's going on in their lives, and I want to help eliminate those dreams that are in the business and also that are personal. And I think that that's how you get people to fall in love with you as a leader and trust you as a leader, when you're both are eliminating those goals. And then before you know it, you have gone so far that there's no way you can go back to what you was doing, And so that's kind of the way I look at leadership.
Well, I mean, and I think that through the pandemic, because everyone on this that's listening to us, they're a leader. And you've had to kind of double down on all of those things that you just talked about, because we're not in the same space. We're on Zoom, just like we are right now. And people are hurting. People are still struggling as we come through the pandemic.
No, yeah, definitely.
So Ken had a huge impact on your life. First, tell us, the people that haven't read the book, who's Ken? And then we'll talk a little bit about his impact.
Yeah, Ken's the founder of the team. He wrote at Penn, and he was a trader, started a business, started an entrepreneurship program, did this rowing program. Amazing dude. I think I said it, he's a Jewish guy. And I think the first smart thing he did was put together a really diverse team. And the second thing he did, if you read the book, he showed up at everyone's house, although some people didn't let him in.
That was the crazy part of the book, when he shows up at your house.
And it's like, it was cool because like a lot of our families were from the South, and they experienced a lot of structural limitations and racism. And they wasn't just going to deliver their kid to this space where no one looks like them. And it comes from a good place. It's their, because of their experience. And he showed up with the other coach, and he was like, I'm here to learn. I want you, he didn't just tell us to come to the river. He was like, I'm going to show up and, meet your parents first, and so he went out of his, his way to really build strong relationships. So he was a great founder.
There's a hilarious part of the book when he's driving the bus. What did you guys call what was it?
The Marshmallow Man. He took this big yellow bus, and he's like, I'm gonna do something different. And he paint the whole bus white. And we was driving that bus through the neighborhood, and people were like, oh my God, this guy's he never even drove a bus before, and
right.
Gosh, yeah, it was crazy.
and then when he hit the car, I was dying. Oh my goodness. Okay, so he talked about how he felt like he failed because his original goal was to get you guys to get scholarships, and that never happened. So talk to me a little bit about that and how you felt about how Ken felt.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, Amy, I think, if you read the book, our team, our coaches were so ambitious, and they were building the airplane in the air. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But it was the best airplane we went on, but it was a lot of craziness at the same time. And I think that, going to Ivy League and the way they grew up, it's like, hey, it's gold medals. That's how we measure success in the sport. And that's what I want you guys to achieve. And I want you guys to get recruited to college. For a lot of us, we still had a lot happening in our lives. Like, the question is, how do you allow this fire inside of you to shine brighter than the fire that happens around you? And they worked hard, really trying to figure this out. And so, because no one got recruited, or we didn't win gold medals, he thought it was a failure. Yeah. And then years later, I remember we was at a convention, and someone said, have any of those kids went on to row at college, go to the Olympics? And he was like, none, but 90% of them own their own business and hire people from their community, right? And I think that sometimes it's so important that we learn a little bit more about the way the community also measures success, right? Mm-hmm. And how do we run the ideas of those who live in that community, run our organization with their ideas and understand more about how they measure success. For us, I know he wanted all these wins, but getting young Black men to be committed to a sport where no one looks like them, where the boathouse wasn't warm and welcoming, where the decor and the photos didn't reflect us, and people were staring at us, and every day seemed like an away game at our boathouse because we shared the boathouse with private schools, but we showed up every day. Like, that was a win. To culturally overcome the fear of water and learn how to swim was a win. And what Chicago's been trying to solve for so long, how do we get these guys from different gangs and neighborhoods to become a brotherhood? Rowan solved that. That was like the biggest win. And so I think sometimes it's important to understand that winning is not the only way we measure success, but the lessons you learn along the way. I always tell young people, I've been around long enough to know that every dream won't be fulfilled, but it's about who you become in the pursuit of those dreams that is fulfilling. And I think that he understood that as the program came along.
Okay, great. So everyone, Arshay is going to have to leave it at 12:55 because hopefully he can get on a flight and get out of OKC. And I know you guys want that for him. But if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. And if I can weave them in, I sure will. So you have this saying in the book that you learned, make it better than you found it. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, it was the first lesson. You know, when you walk into the boathouse, you know, the coach would say, "Hey, leave the boathouse better than you found it, even if you didn't make the mess." And I was like, "What?" Like I grew up learning, like if leave it how you found it. You know what I mean? You leave it better than you
Mm-hmm.
found it, even if I didn't make the mess. He said, "Yes, it simple. It makes it easier for the next group that's coming in." And plus you benefit from the boathouse, you know? And every day he would say, "What's the first rule?" And we would say, "Leave the boathouse better than you found it, even if we didn't make the mess." And what he was imparting in us, what I've learned from that, and what I said to myself as a high school kid is like, okay, not only this boathouse, but how do I leave Alvin? How do I leave my teammates? How do I leave my school? How do I leave my community? How do I leave my country better than I found it, even if I didn't make the mess? And if I can do that, it will make it easier for the next generation, right? Sometimes we say, "I had nothing to do with what happened with the cops and the black kids in this neighborhood. I had nothing to do with what happened in the South many years ago. I had nothing to do with that person at work who created this whole mess." But because we are one team, if we can leave this place, this workplace, better than we found it, even if we didn't create the mess, it makes it better for those who are coming in, who are growing up in our organization. Like that's leadership. That's the job. And so every job I had, you know, from after graduating till now, I always walked in thinking, okay, I want this place to be better because I am here. And I know I am benefited from this place. And it was just that simple. So at work, what hasn't been created? What hasn't been done? And because I'm here, it's going to happen. So when I leave and move on years from now, there will be a photo of Arshay saying, because he's here, because he was in this sport, these are all the lives that changed. And that's how we leave this place better than we found it. That's the attitude that we have. So if we all embrace that responsibility, oh, we would be in a better place, in a better world.
Wow. I don't know if you guys are getting motivated by Arshay Cooper today, but I am. So, but let me keep going. So, inclusion. So you had and it for me, because we're the largest minority and women-owned law firm in Texas, and we go out and try to get business. And I've never been able to share that I don't want it all. I just want to be a part of it. I just want some of the work. I just want to be considered for the work. And you have this beautiful quote in your book that talks about when you looked at the different rowing teams, and you say in the book, quote, "I noticed that most rowers are white, tall, and lean. I am none of those things. So my goal is not to change that about the sport, but to add to it." And I read that and I was like, Oprah, like I was blown away. So talk to us a little bit about inclusion, equity and inclusion, and how you are trying to make that impact on the sport.
Yeah, I think that, I thought about that statement when I was in an interview and someone's like, "So Arshay, you're changing the face of the sport." And I was like, no. I don't want to change the face of the sport. I want to add faces to the sport. You know what I mean? The traditions have changed lives the sport have changed lives way before I got there. Even with our companies, right? Like somehow the success been there before we got there. And when I walk into the company, I don't want to change. I want to add new ideas. Even the history of sports tells us that although all sports have made a significant impact in the world in some way, but none has entirely reached its goal without the power of inclusion.
Right.
And diversity, right? And so there's so many other ideas that we add when we add women to our companies in leadership, when we add people who grew up in a neglected community and never had anything, and somehow through all the fire, they came out strong and put themselves through college. Like that's the kind of tenacity and energy that we want in our workplace to thrive. And I knew that all that talent was in our boat, and we just wanted to be included, and we wanted to make the sport better, And so for the sport, when you think about also the equity piece, a lot of times in rowing, there were programs out there that served under-resourced communities. And those kids really never kind of thrive or was fast on the water. And it wasn't because they wasn't talented. It was because they had less and was expected to perform in the same manner as everyone else. There was diversity in the sport, but they were given less than all the other programs, and so couldn't really perform. And so usually when you start a team like that in an under-resourced community, you have the oldest boats you can find. The riggers are always breaking. You have less days of practice. You have the most novice coach that you can afford, and you can't go to all the other camps that the kids go to. And so you can't really perform. And so what equality says, everyone rows. Equity says it understands that everyone has different circumstances, born into different circumstances, and we give you all the tools you need so we can get the same results as everyone else. And that's all we were looking for. So give us the opportunity. We want to be included just like everyone else and watch us rise. And that was the point of that.
So another fun part of the book for me was talking about when the newspaper did a story on you guys and how you guys showed up. Talk to us, make us laugh a little bit. Now we can laugh now, but back then it was not funny. But tell us about that little segment.
Yeah, so we found out, well, we were always teased in the school for being a row team, right? People would, the guys would sing row, row, row your boat. The football team would make fun of us. You guys are rowing like in slave ships. Like we heard it all. And the popular team was the basketball and football team. And they only been in like the local, like the regional papers. But the Chicago Tribune was like, we're going to give this rowing team front page. Like they're breaking down stereotypes. And we were like, what? And they was like, yeah, you're going to come out. We want you guys to go out to the boat and row fast. You guys can be in the front page of the paper. And we were like, yes. And so I remember all of us showing up and we didn't have our workout uniforms. We creased our pants. That's when you use starch and you would crease in our pants. Yeah. We had the best shirts. We got haircuts. Some folks had their Timbs on. And we showed up to get on the boat just like that. And the coach was like, no, and we got it. So if you look it up, you'll see the Chicago Tribune. You see me with my collar shirt and my jeans on and the boat and stuff like that. And one of the things that you see is, I just have to say, because I thought it was hilarious, is that some of the kids had goggles on, right? And they say, so since we're showing off, the boat flips. We have our goggles. We can just put it on. But, the different games, you will wear your hat to the right or to the left. So the guys had their goggles to the side. And so we go out there and it was crazy. I ripped my shirt up, but we go to the boathouse. The paper hit Chicago. We go to the boathouse the next week, and all the private school had their goggles on to the right, to the left. They thought it was a style, but it was totally a safety thing for us. And so that was like a funny story.
Oh my gosh. So there was another quote in the book, and you say, quote, it's like a bank account. You have nothing to withdraw if you don't make a deposit. Tell us a little bit about that statement.
Yeah, I think it goes along with leadership. I think a lot of times, these kids wasn't making bad choices, but hard and challenging choices to survive. And a lot of times we had, folks who were older was like talking at us. The only time we hear from certain teachers or certain security guards at school or certain people is when we did something wrong, right? Even at the boathouse. Hey, you can't be acting like that. You can't do that. Why are you doing this, right? And what Ken and our coaches were very perfect with mastering was understanding how to make deposits in our lives. Like you go to a bank, you can't get a withdrawal unless you make deposits. And so they were showing up at our house. They was asking us what we want, right? They was asking us, again, the same questions I had: what keeps us at night, keeps us up at night, what keeps us going? So when someone who doesn't know us and see us every day was like, hey, what's wrong? Is there a problem? Share with me what's really happening in your life. They never got a withdrawal because they never made deposits. I don't know you. You don't really care. But every time coach was like, tell me about it, we always spilled. We always told them about it. Why? Because they made the deposits and they always got a withdrawal. And I think even when you're working with coworkers, it's the same thing. Honestly, Ed, your husband, Ed, I didn't know him.
Mhm.
Yeah, we didn't know each other for a long time, but like
Mm-mm.
our relationship is constantly making, the positives in each other's lives. Say, Ed, hey, I'm going to be in Boston, man. Come hang out with me with the CEO of Boston Beer. Or Ed is like, hey, you need this? Hey, meet my friend from the Yankees. Like, it's always these constant deposits and
Mhm.
withdrawals in our relationships. And that's how you build relationships at work or with your leadership. Like there has to be constant withdrawals and deposits.
Yeah. So there was a scene in the documentary where you guys came back together and you did the rowing with the police officers. Can you tell us about that experience and what we can learn and what the viewers can learn from that so that we can start trying to come together and bringing each other together to bridge some of these differences that we have?
Yeah, I think that as an athlete, I think Amy, and I know that you don't accomplish anything comfortable. When you're on that
Right.
court, you're working hard and you're training. And
Yeah.
when you're rowing, you are uncomfortable the whole time and you are courageous. And
Mhm.
I believe first that we must be willing to have very uncomfortable and courageous conversations to get the results that we want. And in our relationship, in our community, I use the same lesson that I can't do the work of eight must do the work of one. And I knew that in our community, the educators was on board to making our community better. Some of the business owners, the pastors, but there was no relationships with the cops. But at the end of the day, and I believe, and I protest all the time, they still gonna work there tomorrow morning in our neighborhoods, interacting with our kids and our families, but they are part of the eight because they're working there every day. And the boat is not gonna move well if not everyone's pulling on that, their weight. And so, and I remember while we was filming, all the producers were really caught up in like the disconnect between the different gangs. And I was like, that's not one of the biggest disconnects is between our community and the police community. And I remember going to the guys and say, hey, I want to ask the cops to row with us. And they were like, are you sure? And I was like, you want to do that? And what I said to them, I said, as a teacher, you will always forget some of your students, but as a student, you'll never forget your teacher. And we have an opportunity to be a teacher. And in order to find that alignment, we have to readjust the lens, the way we see things. And you read the book, you saw the film. There's no way you can be near those guys and not be moved by them. Right. And I wanted to create that opportunity for those who are working in our community. And I invited them out, and it was awkward at first. You know what I mean?
It was awkward in the documentary. Yeah,
and it was.
You can feel it.
You can feel it. But I think the thing that I learned as a kid, Amy, was that Alvin, he was beating everyone up at school. The man
was beating everybody up.
Yeah, he was a fighter. And I was like, and I told Ken, I was like, this guy shouldn't be on the team. And he was like, he's strong, he's gonna stay. And as you read along, me and Alvin became best friends. And what happened was I walked up to him on the bus and I said, why are you fighting? And he said, I've never had a fight because of me. When I first moved here, I got jumped. And the guys from the neighborhood said, this is always going to happen unless you hang with us. And when you're away, who's going to protect your brothers and sisters? So he made the choice to be protected. And I didn't know that. And I judged him. And I became friends with him. And what I've learned from that experience that I use with the cops is that if I walked up to Alvin before he joined the team and said, why are you fighting? Why are you doing that? He would have socked me in the face. Yeah. But I learned that when you're on the same team, that you first have to call in before calling out. Sometimes we want to call out, but I believe in the power of calling in. There are opportunities at times where you just call out, but if you're on the same team and you in the same workplace, and I think that first we must try to call in and then we call out. And so for the cops, I wanted to call them in. And what they would tell you, and we have a segment on the Today Show, and we've done panels together, they said like, hey, I saw how much Black men love their kids through this experience. One of the cops said Alvin grew up not making bad choices, but hard choices, right? And one of the most powerful things that came from the cop, Officer Matt, he's the guy with the big mustache, he said that and this was, we filmed this before George Floyd was murdered. He said, when George Floyd was murdered, I had a lot of bricks thrown at me. And I realized that day, because of you guys, that I can go home and take my uniform off, but y'all can't take y'all black skin off. And so rowing and us getting together was all about just stepping a mile in each other's shoes. And they were great guys. And then we were able to say, hey, man, this happened in the neighborhood. Is there anything you can do about it? We feel comfortable calling out. Why? Because we called in. And we went through uncomfortable things at first, and it wasn't easy, and we had uncomfortable conversations, but we stuck through it. And rowing teaches you to go after it until you get those results. And because of that, things are better.
So that goes right into my next question. So in the book, at one point, you were writing poems. And you felt vulnerable enough to stand up and read your poem to a bunch of guys. So tell us about that, and then talk about how important it is to be vulnerable. I'm a huge Brené Brown fan. The impact of being vulnerable to being successful. Yeah,
we were all taught. We knew we had to be hard. We had to be tough, to be strong on the west side of Chicago, and just to be men. You were taught to be a hunter, take out the garbage, and not really tap into that vulnerability. And writing my poetry was the way of breaking down my own walls. And I knew that the closer you get to your pain, the more you split yourself open. I learned this from my mom's recovery. The more people you will reach. And I love those guys, man. And I think that I didn't know all the things they were going through, but I knew they was all going through things. And I felt like my poem was a way to let them know who they are. And I had to be willing to expose myself. And I think vulnerability breaks down walls. I think it increases awareness. You know what I mean? Where you can share your story, that you're aware of what people are going through. And I think it builds an opportunity for all of us to understand. And I think because of that vulnerability and opening up about the things we go through, and maybe some of the things that we have suffered through, it creates opportunities for us to be better people and to be aware and really, not just say stuff that's insensitive. And so I think, and the way to do that, and the way to tap into that, is to just stay close to the need. Like when you up at night and you're watching TV and it's the middle of the night and that show comes on with starving kids and starving animals, and you're like, oh my God, I want to do something about it. And all of a sudden the commercial comes back on, you're watching your show, you fall asleep, and you forget all about it. You don't have that burden anymore. But when you stay close to the need, stay close to the conversations, even if it's uncomfortable, stay close to the vulnerability and listen and want to hear more, that's the burden. It just gets bigger. And then you create more opportunities to change the culture of the workplace and the environment.
Wow. So another running theme in the book is building trust. The guys had, a lot of the guys were broken, and they were just, surviving, and you're having to get everyone in the same boat and going in the right direction. Talk a little bit about how you build trust, but also maintain it.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a little bit what I was saying earlier, to build that trust. It took the vulnerability, right? Really opening up to who we are. And it took me showing up to the guy's house and really just kind of putting yourself out there in front of them, letting them know that I'm here to protect you and advocate for you. When you advocate for your boys and you advocate for your team, really, stand in front of them, they're gonna trust you, right? And also, I think it was leadership. The coaches really created opportunities for us to have these conversations, to learn more about each other. Really facilitated our van rides when it comes to these, you saw we were having these icebreakers, something, what was the worst day of your high school life, right? The coaches really did their homework. It wasn't just about rowing. It wasn't just business as usual. And our coach, on our team, you would be a great human first, and then let's talk about being great student athletes, right? So I think when the leadership can understand how we get young people to act beyond themselves, that's when the trust, that's when the trust happens. So I think, again, it's going to take things outside of the workplace. So we were faster in the boat because of the chemistry we build outside of the boat, right? And, hanging out, spending more time with each other. For us, it may be professional development, but taking teams together for those out of town trips and connecting with the human first before the coworker, right? Over basketball games, over kids, and all those kind of things. When you build relationships as a human first, and then advocate and then become an ally, that's when the trust starts. And those are some of the things that were demonstrated in the book that allow us to be one.
Okay, so we have one of our viewers, and she is curious. What is next for Arshay Cooper?
Oh, trying to get your daughter into a good college. No, I was just
Yay!
Honestly, I'm trying to, keep some money in y'all pocket.
I appreciate that. I love it.
It's a few things. It's number one, the book is being made into a scripted TV series by Amazon Studios, which is awesome.
I'm literally tearing up. I am so happy to hear. Ed told me about that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so, but just to let you know, the whole thing will be shut down if Denzel don't figure out how to play a young Arshay Cooper.
Oh my goodness. You are swinging for the fences. So Denzel Washington as Arshay Cooper. Boom. Guys, you heard it here first.
Yeah, you heard it here first. So that's happening. Working on the second book. And I think what I spend most of my time working on is this LA 2028. The Olympics will be in our country. Last year, there were 44 rowers. None of them was a person of color. And but the talent is there. And we've been working to solve the equity issues. And so people like Ava, who I'm really working on, and many other athletes of color that's out there, my goal is to make sure in our country that boat reflects the diversity in the country. There's never been a Black man who rowed on American soil in the Olympics. There's only been one woman, Black woman, in '84. And there's only been 5 Black Olympians in the 150 plus years the sport been an Olympic sport. Wow. So the big goal is to make sure that this sport reflects the diversity we have in this country.
Okay, so if we have some stubborn folks still watching, why should they buy this book and be a part of our book club?
It's a good question. I think that the book challenges you to do more. I think a lot of times we are looking for something more to do outside of our workplace. When I roll up in my neighborhood, I don't want people, when they see my car, the kids on my block and their parents, I don't want them to say, oh, the chef or the author or the rower. I want them to say that guy, that's the hope for our community. And when you think of Harriet Tubman, you don't think about her career as a Union spy, but you think about the freedom that she brought to so many people. When you think about Gandhi, you don't think about his career as an attorney, but the peace that he brought to so many villages. When you represent something bigger than yourself, right? That's when the true change happens. And so when they see your company, they know what you're all about. But when they see your company, do they say that place is giving opportunities for kids who look like mine? That place, because of that place, women will thrive. Because of that place, more companies will be established. And so when you act beyond yourself, beyond the boat, that's when change happens. And I think the book will just put a little compassion in your heart and help you to really work towards that.
So we have one more question. We've got 3 more minutes before you hit the road. So I don't know if you have your Q&A up, but I'll just read it from Jay Tobin. I loved a description of your talk with Preston at the year-end skating party. What allowed you to embrace him as an old friend as opposed to expressing your disappointment at leaving the team and making the questionable life choices?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the first thing that I said, you understand that Preston is Preston not because, he wanted to just steal or he wanted to sell drugs. Like, these kids was not eating.
Mm-hmm.
Like my grandmother moved to the South, from the South to the States to escape the racism, right? But when she moved to Chicago, there was still redlining. Like she couldn't take out a loan. She couldn't put her kids in a school where they had really great education, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and I think that, the love and understanding that how bad he wanted it and how bad he wanted to change, but the environment was just so rough. It's just helped me to kind of embrace him. And the fact that we still rode in the same boat. We still are on the same team, regardless of, you always have to leave room for mistakes. You know what I mean? Regardless of, he showed up and he didn't just quit because he's like, I'm done, I'm lazy. You know what I mean? I understood that there's circumstances that happen, like COVID hits people differently, right?
Yeah.
When people are not performing at work anymore, that's because something is wrong. People are not moving because something is broken, and it's our job to fix it. You know what I mean? And that's why my arms are always open.
That is great. Okay, well, we need you to get on that flight to hopefully you win and you get to where you're supposed to go before I can get home. But I just want to thank you so much. I know I came out of the blue with this and said, hey, I've got this crazy idea to have a book club with a bunch of lawyers. And you said yes. So I appreciate that. So what else we're going to do, folks, is we're going to do a book club. So hopefully you can get the book or download the audio version. We're also going to plan to watch the documentary down the line, and we're trying to figure out if we can find a time where Arshay can be in Dallas and you guys can meet him, and it'll just be a great event. So Arshay, again, thank you so much. Susan, I'm turning it back over to you, honey.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you, Amy. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram, and watch the film on Amazon Prime and the book anywhere books are sold. So thank you.